Robot Escapes, Chapter 31 The Campfire. Wood smoke billowed up from the backyard and drifted across the farm. Roz was building a fire for the Sharifs. In her old life, the robot made fire by cracking special stones together until she got a spark. In her new life, she used a lighter. The family sat around the rippling flames and gazed up at the stars, and the dog stretched out on the warm ground. The robot was standing nearby, but her thoughts were far away. Her computer brain was scrolling back through the memories of campfires and gazing at the stars with Bright Bill. Puffy white marshmallows were skewered onto the ends of sticks and then roasted above the flames. The children laughed as their marshmallows caught on fire, and they liked them charred on the outside but gooey on the inside. Their father preferred his evenly browned. When the Sharifs were stuffing their mouths, they were chatting happily. "That's the space station," said Jaya, pointing out to a tiny dot moving slowly through the sky. "I can't believe people live up there." "Animals live there too," said Jad. "The station has a farm. We should bring our cows up there and show those space farmers how it's done." "I think our cows are perfectly content here on Earth," said Mr. Sharif. "And so am I." Once the marshmallows were gone, Jaya and Jad snuggled up with Oscar and stared into the flames and asked their father about the old days. But the children were too cozy to stay awake for long, so Mr. Sharif spoke to Roz instead. "We made campfires all the time when I was a boy." The man poked the coals with the marshmallow stick, and the glowing embers floated into the air. "The whole family would sit around like this, telling stories. We had a nice life here. But then my brother and sister moved to the city, and my parents got old, and everyone just expected me to take the farm. I couldn't run this place by myself," he went on, "so I hired Jamila. I did the farm work and she managed the business. We made a good team, and then we fell in love. When Jamila was pregnant with Jad, we bought a few automatic machines to help out. Then Jaya showed up, and we bought a few more. If I had known one of these machines would be the death of her." The farmer's voice trailed off. Roz wanted to know more about Jamila, and about the Sharifs, and about the rest of the family, but a normal robot wouldn't get so personal and ask so many questions. So she kept her questions to herself and dropped another log onto the fire. At the end of chapter 32 there, Mr. Sharif seems to be blaming a robot for the death of his wife and the children's mother. Why don't you make a prediction in the comments to see, um, was that death intentional? Did the robot go rogue? Did it defect and kill her? Or was there an accident? What happened? I want you to make a prediction based on past evidence from the story and what we know about robots in this story. Okay. Chapter 32 The Old Barn. Long ago, Hilltop Farm was a very different place. The original farmers grew vegetables and fruits and orchards, and they raised chickens and sheep and goats. The farm had changed a lot since then, but there were still signs of the past. Low stone walls still lined some of the fields, and a rusty tractor sat in the weeds. A hidden le- hidden within the densely wooded grove was an old barn. The barn hadn't been used in generations. Over the years, the trees had completely grown up around it, and the moss had covered across the roof. But the barn still stood, strong and solid. Roz wanted to take a look inside. The big barn door screeched along the rails. "Hello?" said the robot, peering into the darkness. "Is anyone in here?" Another thing to think about when Roz peers into the building, is she thinking, or is she speaking in the animal language or the human language? What do you think? A mouse squeaked and scurried out of sight, and then Roz had the barn to herself. She stepped through the doorway and switched on her headlights. The vast interior was crisscrossed with thick wooden beams, stairways, and ramps that led up to the lofts and the platforms. Lanterns hung from hooks on the wall. Old-fashioned farm equipment still lay in there. The barn was still and had a faint smell of farm animals, even though none had lived in there in ages. A large trunk sat on a work table covered in rust. Roz carefully opened the lid and examined the contents: a collection of farming magazines, a pair of leather gloves, a pencil nub, and then she noticed a journal, a small journal. The name Cyrus Sharif was elegantly scrawled across the cover. The pages were filled with its handwritten notes and hand drawn diagrams about raising livestock and growing crops and building barns, and about working with the land with the help of people, and with the help of strong animals and simple machines. Cyrus Sharif had also jotted down his thoughts about the long history of farming. He believed that the modern world owned its entire owed its entire existence to the ancient farms when early humans first started growing their food. Those farms were small and primitive, but they were supported by villages, which became towns, which became cities. The writings were so wise and insightful that Roz read the journal from cover to cover. By the end, she felt almost as if she knew Cyrus Sharif, whoever he was. The journal was a treasure, and she tucked it into the pocket of her tool belt for safekeeping. Chapter 33: The Autumn. Autumn colors were sweeping across the farm country. The lush greens of the summer had faded into reds and browns, and crops were harvested, and leaves fell away, and the landscape turned stark and gray. On Hilltop Farm, the cows were grazing on what remained of the pasture grass, while the herding machines hovered nearby. The field machines were preparing the fields for winter, and the drones circled the farm several times a day, but there was less to report in the autumn. Although Jay and Jad were busy with school, they made time for Roz. The children never grew tired of listening to the robot stories, and they never grew tired of sharing their own. The bees and the mice and the deer and the frogs and the raccoons and the squirrels and the snakes were all getting ready for the cold weather. So too were the birds. The owls spruced up their nests, and the crows stockpiled acorns, and the swallows were still swooping over the farmland, but they would soon be leaving for the winter. And any day now, other migratory birds would begin passing through on their journeys to the south. Chapter 34: The Delighted Geese. A flock of geese had landed on Hilltop Farm, and it was the first flock of the autumn migration. The geese floated on the pond, clearing their feathers and nibbling on their weeds. But they all stopped what they were doing when Roz waved and said hello. The robot never forgot a face, and she was certain she didn't know any of these geese. But they seemed to know her. Before she even introduced herself, the lead goose squawked, "Is your name Roz?" The robot stared at the goose. "Yes, it is." "And you can speak the language of the animals?" The answer to the question was obvious, but Roz politely said, "Yes, I can speak the animal language." "Do you by chance have a goose for a son?" "Yes, I do," said Roz. "His name is Brightbill." At that, a voice busted out, "The stories are true!" And suddenly the flock was smiling and fluttering over to Roz. When the commotion scuttled down, the leader explained, "All along our migration, we've heard rumors of a robot who can speak the language of the animals, and who has a goose for a son, but who is trapped on a farm. That sounded so ridiculous, but yet here you are." The flock was absolutely delighted to meet the robot. They lunged around the pond. They lounged around the pond for a couple of days, chatting with Roz whenever she came by, and then they continued flying south to their wintering grounds. Another flock of geese arrived, and the same thing happened all over again. Roz welcomed them all with delight, ready to meet. Everyone was ready to meet the legendary robot. But then the flocks continued south. Again and again, it kept happening. Before long, the coming and going of delighted geese was just another part of the robot's autumn routine. Staggering behind the others, as usual, was Wingtip's flock. When Roz saw him splashing into the pond, she felt something like hope that they might have some news for her. Sadly, the geese had no news to report, and the flock took off and left Roz behind. She began to question whether she'd ever see Brightbill again. Chapter 35: The Memories. Roz still dreamed of escaping and going home and reuniting with her son, but her dreams were starting to feel impossible. She was losing hope Was it time for the robot to accept her new life and to forget the old one? Forget? Was troubled by that word. You see, her computer brain remembered every detail of her life on the island, and it hurt to think that she might never make it back there. However, the robot could always forget. She could erase her old memories. It would be like it never happened. The heaviness that she now felt would vanish. But without her memories, who would she be? No, Roz wanted to remember her old life, which was good, because someone from her old life was about to appear. Who's going to appear? Put in the comments what you think.